So as the NAFTA deal is threatening to derail in Washington, the finance minister is under heavy fire over his proposals to end some corporate taxes, the confusion over taxing employees' discounts, and now to top it all off, the finance minister has had to clarify why he didn't disclose the company that owns his villa in the south of France to the ethics commissioner until almost 2 years after he took office. He says it was just an early administrative confusion. He's done nothing illegal. But when you're trying to champion the middle class, the optics of having to explain the corporate ownership of your villa in the south of France make that a little more difficult. To talk about that and the NAFTA deal, I'm joined now by Liberal MP Steve MacKinnon, Conservative Deputy Leader Lisa Raitt, she's in Montreal, and from Windsor NDP trade critic Tracey Ramsey. Good morning to all of you. And Mr. MacKinnon, got to start with you because Bill Morneau will have a full caucus meeting tomorrow, obviously to talk about these tax proposals. Is your government prepared to back down from some of these tax proposals?
Well, I know I look forward to this, as do all my colleagues. We've had a great discussion over the course of the summer and well into October about these particular proposals. I know we've engaged, I certainly have in my riding with the business community, with others, and to get their constructive suggestions.
Are you getting a lot of backlash, frankly?
Well, I know that all of that information has been very well received at the finance department. I know that a number of things have been pointed out to me by tax experts, entrepreneurs, and others, and I think the finance minister has heard all of these things, and I know we're looking really forward to seeing what he comes forward with in terms of a final proposal. As you know, these were discussion papers, and we're looking forward to seeing what he comes up with.
So you don't know. I mean, Lisa Raitt, I'll ask you because there's been, look, the finance minister is under a lot of attack. Do you expect that the Liberals are going to back down on some of these things?
I don't know. I think they have to. I mean, what I heard, Evan, is that there's 21,000 separate submissions to Finance Canada on these tax changes. So if they got through these that quickly, then they had people working around the clock and burning the midnight oil to see what the Canadians had to say about these tax changes. But it's very clear. Canadians don't like it. Small business doesn't like it. Doctors don't like it. And farmers don't like it. So we'll have to see what they come up with. But it's very interesting that it's happening very quickly on Monday, not a normal caucus day for people out there who don't necessarily follow what the normal is in Parliament, which means to me something is coming in the early part of the week. So I'm looking very carefully at Monday and Tuesday as to what announcements Minister Morneau is going to be making.
Yeah, well, let me just go back to Steve MacKinnon. It is unusual. That's why everyone thinks, is something coming? Maybe this is the, are you going to double down on these taxes or are you going to back off? Is it coming?
Whatever we do, and what has animated us for our entire time in government is equity, tax fairness, yes, but also looking forward to creating a better deal for the middle class, those who seek to make a better life for themselves in Canada. Whatever proposals that this government puts forward will be through that lens. Will be through the lens of making life better, more fair for all Canadians.
But you don't know if it's coming this week. You got to admit, though, this villa story can't be helped. You can't. It's hard to be the champion of the middle class and have the finance minister having to deal with that, right?
Well, I think the finance minister has described the measures that he has taken and that he's complied with the spirit and the letter of the law. And look, these administrative and other things, they occur, but the finance minister has complied in every way with the spirit and the letter of the law.
That's not true.
Well, what are you talking about?
Well, okay, hang on. Let me bring in Tracey, then Lisa Raitt. But Tracey Ramsey, can you weigh in on that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you know, the finance minister forgot that he had a villa in France for 2 years and, you know, just remembered. Shows how completely out of touch he is with Canadians. I sat with farmers this morning who are really worried about the tax implications that are coming forward. And I hope that this emergency meeting means that the Liberals are going to finally have a conversation about tax fairness as a whole, because we brought in a motion last year, the NDP, saying let's look at tax havens, let's look at closing stock option tax loopholes. The Liberals supported this, but have done nothing about it. So if they're serious about tackling this very large issue, then let's do it comprehensively and not put a microscope on small businesses. And when you want to talk about tax, like being off the mark, this tax about employee discounts that came out and was retracted, talking about the Netflix tax, it feels like the Liberals are all over the place when it comes to tax, and they need to take a step back and look at what they're doing.
Look, let me respond to what Tracey said. We've clearly said there will be no Netflix tax. We've clearly said there will be no tax on employee
discounts. Which is not great for our cultural community who's trying to compete and get a level playing field.
So that now the New Democrats want a Netflix tax. So we want
a fair playing field for our cultural industries across the country.
Well, we put $1.8 billion new money into our cultural industries, which is one of our first acts in office. But with respect to employee discounts, let me be very clear. I know Minister Bryson has been very clear, Minister Laboutier has been very clear, and the Prime Minister has been very clear. This is not on. It's not happening. It has been shut down, and it will be not be considered.
Just to be fair, and I've talked to Mr. Bryson about that. It can't be shut down because it's in the Income Tax Act.
It can't be shut down.
Well, there's an interpretation.
It can't be shut down.
There was an interpretation put online. There was a contradictory interpretation put online in another location. Let me assure you that there will be clarity, an absolute clarity, that retail workers in the food service industry will not be subject to tax on employee discounts. That's not happening.
Okay, last one before we get to NAFTA, Lisa Raitt.
I'm going to tell you something, Evan, this just shows you that this government doesn't know how to govern, because you cannot have political interference with the Canada Revenue Agency and how they administer the law before them. If there's a problem with the law, and there very may well be, that's a Finance Canada issue, and they're the ones that have to draft the amendments to the legislation if that's what they have to do. They have seen a problem has happened, they didn't know it was happening, and then their fix is actually, I would say, really bad governance of telling the CRA what to do or not to do. It's a finance problem. It's got to go back to the feet of Bill Morneau. It's his officials that should have briefed him up on what was coming down the pipe, and they didn't. This is a complete dropping of the ball.
Tracey Ramsey wanted to weigh in on that. Tracey.
There's so much doublespeak that's happening that Canadians are confused about what's happening with the Liberal taxation plan, and rightly so, because there are all these messages. You have one message coming out one day saying they're going to tax our retail sector, which are largely women, low income, minimum wage, precarious workers, who you can't target anyone more vulnerable in our society.
I don't know how we can be more clear. This is not happening.
Okay, in the last 2 minutes, I want to get to NAFTA real quick, though. Donald Trump keeps threatening to rip it up. We don't know what's going to happen. We're in the midst of round 4. Steve MacKinnon, what's the red line here? At some point, Donald Trump, who's been open about this has to benefit America first, and it's got to benefit American workers. At what point does it become too expensive for Canada and we walk away from the table? What's the Canadian red line here? Because so far all we've heard is charm, but we haven't heard what's the red line.
You know, the thing about trade is you actually can have a win-win-win. A common trade area can actually be something where everyone benefits, and that's what we're looking for in these negotiations. Look at the auto sector. Cars go back and forth across our border, sometimes several times, for parts, for new technologies, and so on, creating wealth and creating value on both sides of the border.
It may make the case. I guess the question is, I don't know if Donald Trump will buy that case. That may be what we're selling. Tracey Ramsey, the last word we've got on that. What's your concern about Canada negotiating this NAFTA deal?
Well, I'm going to tell you, first of all, that I'm shocked by Steve's answer. Clearly, he's not paying any attention to what's happening, in particular around auto. Today, the U.S. came out and said they want 50% U.S. domestic content in auto. This will cause Canada and Mexico to compete directly for jobs. We all know who wins in that. It's Mexico.
These
at $1.20 an hour, it is not the Canadians that are winning in that picture. Steve, I'm going to tell you that you're not paying attention to what's impacting people and their jobs. And we are talking, you're saying a win-win-win. For working people, if you don't level that labor playing field, if you don't address the tariff, we have the lowest auto tariff around the world that is hurting us, and we're having massive imports. If you don't start to put some policies in place in this trade deal and outside of this trade deal to address the
labor standards paragraph's
that's not what a gender.
That's what an Indigenous
You've got to be kidding me. You're talking about auto jobs.
I want to give Lisa Raitt one chance here. Hang in there, Lisa Raitt. You're concerned about NAFTA right now, real quick.
My concern is we don't know what the Prime Minister and the President discussed, because something big happened in that discussion. And I'm very concerned, it's what Tracey's talking about, which is the very fact that Canada and Mexico are going to be pitted against one another to take whatever the leftovers are of what the U.S. is asking for. Aluminum is going to be on the table now. Steel is going to be on the table now. These are really big issues for some very core industries in our country. And having the world tour of going from town to town may be helpful on a charm offensive, but at some point in time, we have to really figure out exactly what's going to happen on this.
I got to leave it there. Great discussion. Lisa Raitt, Tracey Ramsey, and Steve MacKinnon. I appreciate that very much.